Water-based markers versus acrylic markers. What is the difference? Similarities? Best techniques? But most importantly, which type is the better one for you and your project? In this video, I will test both types of markers side by side to go beyond the obvious differences and then complete two artworks step by step so you can see for yourself. Hi, I'm Leila, a professional artist. Welcome to my art studio and this channel. Subscribe, press the bell, but only if you like learning about painting, drawing, finding out about art materials and other creative things. Okay, let's have a look at our contestants for today's video. In the corner of acrylic markers, we have Arrtx 60 color set, which was posted to me by the brand to test out. They are not sponsoring the video, only giving me the product to try out. I will leave the links under the video. I do not earn anything through these links. They are just there for you to check out the details if you need to. These acrylic markers are very creamy and have a great tip for creating a versatile line. I've swatched them all for you so you can see the color range in this set. I do have a more in-depth review on Arrtx acrylic markers already. You can find the link to that video in the description. In the opposite corner, we have MZSCM set of 132 water-based markers. I've had these for a while. Unfortunately, this particular set is no longer available, but there are other sets of water-based markers out there. Okay, so first let's perform few different tests. One of the obvious things is that these markers are going to be acrylic and these ones are going to be water-based markers, so I'll call them watercolor markers. Acrylic markers cannot be dissolved with water, but watercolor markers can. What about on black paper? Acrylic markers work beautifully on black paper. Not only that, you can layer them. This set of Arrtx acrylic markers also has metallic colors. Look how beautifully they look on the black paper. Now let's try water mixable markers on black paper. They are barely showing and it's really hard to tell the colors apart. So if you're someone who loves working on dark grounds, right now you can definitely see that this is a deal breaker for you. But if you like to work on white surfaces or light colored surfaces, keep watching this video. The opaqueness and the transparency of these felt tips mean that they are better for certain things in mixed media art. For example, acrylic tips are much better for adding finishing details on top of artworks. Like for example, if you have an acrylic or watercolor mixed media sketch, you can apply them over the top. So they're very good for overpainting. But watercolor tips are better for underpainting. Like for example, if you love working with pencils or any other media, you can use them to create your base layers and then add things over the top. So watercolor ones are much better for underpainting. So at this stage, think about your process for mixed media art. Do you like adding details as over painting, or do you like to create areas for underpainting and then apply details on top? And one last big difference is that acrylic markers are really good for working on many different surfaces, not just paper. So if you love doing DIY, decorating furniture, other objects that might be metal, glass, plastic, or anything else, acrylic markers are really good for that. I have a video on that as well, and you'll find it in the description, where I try them out on many different surfaces. Water-based markers, on the other hand, don't do a very good job. Not only do some colors not even go on evenly onto other surfaces, like for example metal covered with enamel, they also are not very permanent. If you are into that kind of side of art, maybe DIYing things and so on, then again you would probably lean towards acrylic markers. So if you're after a product that will go onto many surfaces and will be less transparent, can be layered up, then definitely acrylic markers are your friend. If you only work on paper, you might say, well, what's the difference? I only work on paper of light colors. I want to know what is better for me, acrylic markers or watercolor markers. Which brings me to my next test. I'm going to create two artworks side by side. Similar subject matter, one with acrylic markers and another one with water mixable ones. Let's have a look. What will you choose at the end? The idea is not to create exactly the same artworks, but to work on similar subject. And for the subject, I have chosen a birch tree forest with yellowing leaves. With acrylic markers, just like with acrylic paint, you can layer them up. So as soon as one layer is dry, you can create a completely different color over the top. You have to worry a little bit less about placing wrong colors somewhere unless you are placing black over where you want it to be white, and so on. You can mix them together like you would acrylic paint, but only while they're wet. Being able to use water means you can soften them, which means you can layer them over each other to mix the colors together. You can also achieve smoother surfaces and color transitions than you can with acrylic felt tips. If you enjoy watching videos on this channel and interacting in the comment section, go over to my Patreon page and check that out. There's more tutorials, voting polls, ideas, and so many other things where you can win prizes, request tutorials on a specific subject, and feedback videos where I give you feedback in the video on your own art. So if you'd like to have a try at all of that, go over to my Patreon page. You'll find more stuff over there. You can see that acrylic markers, even white, is reasonably opaque, and it can go over some other colors and lighten them up. But of course, with any markers, the bigger the set, the better it is and easier to create artworks. Unlike paint, where you can really mix up any color you want, as long as you've got about 8 colors, you're pretty much good to go. With any tips, whether they're acrylic, whether they are alcohol markers or mixable water-based markers, you really want to have the diversity of color. With acrylic markers, you want to build up your colors. With watercolor markers, you want to layer them up from lightest to darkest, not the other way around. Layering acrylic markers is very easy. All you need to do is wait for the previous layers to dry, and it goes on just like paint. So you can build lots of different layers up, and if you want to create a very opaque look, you can go over twice or even 3 times, making sure each previous layer is completely dry. I think these bright orange leaves on the side there are maple leaves, not the birch leaves. With acrylic markers, it's just so easy. Each little dab becomes a little leaf. The color is quite opaque, very intense. Watercolor tips are a little bit different. Because of their transparency, you can layer colors up and mix them in such a way. You can see how here, when I'm applying yellow over the blue, I'm creating this lovely green color. I will have to add green color to the acrylic painting separately, but if you want to create really bright yellow leaves, you would need to reserve white paper. So in a way, you can say that watercolor tips require more planning than acrylic tips. While you're working with watercolor tips, you can feel that they are just a little bit less brighter than the acrylic markers. But because watercolor tips are transparent and the whiteness of the paper is shining through, they become more luminous. So they still, at the end of the day, look quite bright, but not because of the brightness of the ink, but because of the glow of the paper from underneath. I'm quite lucky that I've got two works that I'm working side by side. If you're working on one sketch, you would need to give it some time to rest, to dry. Like at the moment, I've been sketching on this one. Now I can come back to this sketch with acrylic markers and this is all dry. But this is quite damp. So by the time I finish working on this, I can move on to this one and this one will be dry. But if you're working on just one, with either one of those, you would need to give it time to rest or have a hair dryer handy to just give it a quick blast. I almost feel like there's not enough colors for me, but luckily you can still merge and mix these colors together, even when they come in acrylic felt tip form as well. I love how you can layer and layer and layer these up. The more you layer them up, the more beautiful the surface of the artwork becomes. These markers are great for anyone who loves creating pointillism or make emphasis on strong lines and mark making. Acrylic markers are great for lines, but water-based markers are lovely to create flowing colors. Not exactly like you would with actual watercolor paint. Of course, markers are very different media, but still you can create nicer transitions from one color to the other by adding a little bit of water. Now that most of the paper area is covered, let's have a look at the composition and add shadows and details. You can see how even with very light transparent colors in water-based markers, you can just layer them up and create a much more darker shade. And now it's time for the final details, like thin little branches and little additions if you need to do at the end, if you need to add them at the end. It's time to remove the masking tape. So, as always, my verdict at the end. What can I tell you guys? One thing that I'm gonna say straight away is that if you are planning to create somewhat realistic sketches, no matter what it is you're sketching, landscape, still life, portrait, whatever it is, you want to have a set that has quite a few colors. So, for example, a few months ago, I used Arrtx acrylic markers set, which was half the size of the one that I've used today. And with those markers, I wouldn't even venture out to try and create something like this. It's great for decorative purposes, creating patterns, lines, maybe coloring in books. But if you want to create something that, you know, is more realistic, then you need a bigger set. In fact, I struggled in some areas, even with a sketch like this, where I wanted something that was a little bit darker than the gray that they had, the darkest gray they had there, but a little bit lighter than the black. The black is very strong in here, which is great, especially if you're into like manga cartoons or anything like this. That would be great. This set is huge, so I did not have those kind of issues, but if you are planning to do something substantial like sketches from life or images or anything like this, I suggest go for a larger larger set. So these are the colors here, you can see, but this first row, except for the black here and then the gold in this row here, these are metallic or fluoro colors. So these colors are great, as I said, for making patterns, for decorative subjects and things like that. But if you're going for something realistic, you want lots of variations of the shade. So for example, if you have paint, you can mix those colors together. But when you are working with felt tips, it's much harder. There is a limit to how much you can mix or overlay. Okay, let's get back to this tutorial though. So you can have a look how the texture of the acrylic markers is much thicker. I can literally, as I'm doing this with my finger, I can feel the bump. So they layer up, they build up one on top of another one. And the more layers you create, the more beautiful they look. With water-based markers, there's nothing. If I had my eyes closed, I wouldn't be able to tell you that there's an artwork here. It just all feels like paper. It's really easy to build up colors with acrylic markers like you saw here. It's almost like they have a little bit of white pre-mixed with them to make them very intense, very strong. And you can see how I could actually layer up lighter colors on top of darker colors, like you could say, for example, with acrylic paint as well. Whereas with water-based markers, I can't make things lighter, just like with watercolor. So if I want to create lighter shades, it means I need to bring in other materials like gouache, like acrylic, or acrylic tip markers. And that in itself dictates the techniques that you're going to be using with these two. So if here you want to work out from the lighter colors to darker, I've reserved white paper where I wanted white to show. Whereas here, you can start with darker, you can start with background, because you know you can layer things up without a problem. Mixing colors with water-based markers is easier though. For example, I can use water and I can merge colors one into the other. I can also apply one color over the other to create a completely different color. Like remember here where I had blue and I've applied yellow, I've created this really bright green here. It's a little bit different with acrylic markers, because acrylic markers, you can only mix them up when they're still damp. When they dry, you can layer on top, but they are less transparent, so that transparency effect just will not be happening. Another thing to look at is the marks that these tips make. Like for example, with these acrylic tips, they have a much softer brush, so you can press on it almost kind of like very similar to a real brush. Whereas the specific set that I have of water-based ones is not. Now, I don't think that it is a specific thing for acrylic markers or water-based markers. I think it is probably more the difference in the brand. You might see acrylic markers from another brand that have brush that's a little bit stiffer, or a watercolor felt tips with the brush that's a little bit softer. So it could be just specific to these different companies. But also having a dual tip really helped when it came to doing very tiny little details. So for example, here I have this little thing here where I could just add little details, and I also have this thicker, wider brush tip, which, you know, makes sense that it would make it a little bit easier. The little tip is not available in the acrylic markers. I'm not sure again if it's just the specific brand that likes to keep just one tip going, or whether there's something technical which does not allow you to have a smaller tip with acrylic markers. But even just using the brush tip itself, I will tell you that when I was working with acrylic markers, it almost felt like the line and the mark had a much stronger impact on the artwork because it was so much more obvious. So if you like making lines, making dashes, any kind of mark making, I'd say probably go towards acrylic markers. If you're not so fast with having these lines and things like that obvious, if you might prefer having blurred colors and so on, then I suggest that you probably go for water-based ones. And now, last but not least, the color. The color in these is quite interesting because, as you remember, our on black experiment where the acrylic markers are really shining, absolutely beautiful. Look at this. You can create an artwork on black, whereas water-based, you can barely see anything. So if we are looking at working on white paper, these similar qualities come through here as well, but in a different way. You get your basic color with acrylic marker and it stays there. With water-based marker, it's transparent. So if you're working on a bright white paper, these colors become much more luminous, just like watercolor paint. You get stronger, more vibrant colors, even though on their own these colors are not stronger than these ones, but the after effect is quite glowing. When you look closely at these two artworks, you will also notice that acrylic markers appear much more pastel, and it is because of this effect of adding white into the paint to make them stand out more on when you're working on different surfaces, or when you're working on darker colors. On the other hand, you don't have that effect with the water-based markers. So, which one is your favorite? Please let me know in the comments. If you asked me, I would have to say I really enjoyed working with both. I find it a little bit easier to work with this set with water-based ones, but I think it is because I have pretty much double the color than what I have here. If you're looking for a set of, doesn't matter what type of markers you're looking for, make sure that you buy a large one if you're not just using it to highlight certain things or use them in coloring books. If you are planning to create realistic sketches, this is something where you want to have a really large range of different variations of each color. So let me know. Are you planning to get acrylic markers because you want to create artworks on different types of surfaces? Or whether you want to go for the water-based markers because you love the luminosity and the feel that it creates? I really look forward to hearing your opinions. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And I want to say a big thank you to my wonderful patrons who are supporting this channel. I also would like to know what you think about this video, so please leave your opinions in the comment section. Other than that, I hope you guys all have a lovely day, and I look forward to see you in the next video. See you soon! Bye-bye!